Good morning and welcome to Calvary Baptist Church. It's Bible study time. We're gathered in our places with bright, shining faces. I wore my heart tie today because Valentine's Day is this week. We had a lovely dinner last night, and someone told me this morning they had a lovely time at a lovely dinner. And so anyway, I'm glad. That's a good thing. It was a fun time of fellowship. And sorry if you missed it because maybe we'll do it again. Anyway, it was good. We've been talking about worship, and the heart of worship has been the title of our theme throughout these lessons. Um, we looked at focus, we looked at inspiration. Inspiration, we looked at the attitude, and today we're going to look at the benefits. And, the thing that kind of speaks to me in all of this is everything that we do in our spiritual lives, really everything we do in all of our lives, but especially our spiritual life, the key is motive. And because we can be misinterpreted, we can be misunderstood, we can, the world gets confused anyway about the fact that we are, some would say, way off in left field somewhere on this tangent of following after a God that we can't see. But we've learned that it's not foolishness to us. And I'm reminded of what Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 1. He talked about how the message of the cross is foolishness to those perishing. It is, however, God's power to us who are being saved. 1 Corinthians 2:14, he said, the natural man can't receive the things of the Spirit of God because they're foolishness unto him. Neither can he know them because they're spiritually discerned, or they're spiritually transmitted. And so if you're not tuned in to the Spirit of God, then you don't get that. So it's all about motive. It's all about what is my reasoning. Why am I doing this? And we do what we do out of obedience to God, but our obedience is based upon the fact that we are loved by God, and that we have God's presence with us, and God is near. Therefore, that is our reasonable service, or as Paul would say in Romans 12:1, it is our spiritual worship. It is what we do because we do it based on that motive. So the benefits of worship then, what are the benefits, and what's going to happen, and why is it going to matter to us? We go to Psalm 63, and we've been looking at a lot of the Psalms in these. Next week, when we go to the lifestyle of worship for our title, it'll be out of the book of Colossians. But today we go to Psalm 63, and we see a psalm again attributed to David. It not only says it's a psalm of David, but in lots of manuscripts say it's a psalm from the wilderness. And what does that mean? There was a couple times in David's life when he could have been called being in the wilderness. One was when he was fleeing from Saul. Saul was chasing him to kill him, Saul's army, and so David was fleeing, and he was kind of hiding out to be away from him. Another time when David was hiding out was when his son Absalom was trying to take over the throne. And so he was hiding from Absalom. So if you kind of keep those couple of things in your mind, that possibly this was what was going on in David's life, then it might give you a little better picture when we read through it of exactly what he was experiencing, what was going on. Now, I also want to say this before we start, and that is that there are those who say, well, David was out in the wilderness. He didn't know where God was. I don't believe that's true, but you might think that when you read it. But I believe David knew exactly where God was. You have to remember, from the time he was a youth, he was a man after God's own heart. He understood the presence of God, unlike a lot of people in his day. And so therefore, I don't believe David was concerned about where God was, or why has God forsaken me, or why has God left me. David knew God was near. The thing was, he really needed to know something. He really was seeking God to get an answer to this wilderness of his life that he was going through. And so I believe that David was at a place where he hungered for more of God. And that's how I would read the context of this psalm. Okay, so let's begin. Psalm 63, verses 1 through 5. It says, God, you are my God. Now, see, that sounds like a guy who was pretty secure, or he didn't have an identity crisis, wondering where God was. That's what it sounds like to me. He says, you are my God. I eagerly seek you. I thirst for you. My body faints for you in a land that is dry, desolate, and without water. And when I read through this, um, he puts a lot of emphasis on some very expressive verbs. So think about verbs that you just heard in that verse. I eagerly seek you. I thirst for you. My body faints for you in a land that is dry and desolate and without water. Verse 2, so I gaze, there's another verb, on you in the sanctuary to see your strengths and your glory. My lips will glorify you. There's another verb, because of your faithful love, or because your faithful love is better than life. Verse 4, so I will bless you. There's another verb. As long as I live, at your name I will lift up. Another verb, my hands. You, verb, satisfy me with rich foods. My mouth will, verb, praise you with joyful lips. Okay, so listen to those verbs and think, what is David really saying? Well, he's saying that worship is satisfying to him. So what are the benefits of worship? Even if he's out in the wilderness, even if he's in a place where he feels desolate, he still knows it's satisfying to him to worship God. And that doesn't sound like to me a guy who has lost the sense of the presence of God. It just sounds like to me a guy who hungers for more. He's looking for answers. He's trying to see what God's going to do next, because he's one who knows what God has done for him in the past. So he was yearning for more of God. It says he looked eagerly and earnestly for the Lord. In other words, he didn't stop searching and seeking what God's will was for him in his life. He says, I thirst for you. My body faints for you in a land that is dry. And he may have been out in the wilderness, may have been out in a desolate part. En Gedi is the place, one of the places where David hid from Saul. And I've been to En Gedi, and let me tell you, it's a desolate place. It's out just west of the Dead Sea. It's a rough place, and there's like, we would probably not call them mountains, but there's mountains along there, big bluff type things, rocks and sand. And he hid in a cave up in there. I didn't walk all the way up in there. They said it's about a 45-minute walk. We were only there for a couple hours. I wasn't going to walk up there, but there's a big, huge cave that has big enough room that would be big enough for David to have gotten his army in there to hide from Saul. Anyway, it sounds like to me, not only was he out in the wilderness, but he was in a spiritual wilderness. Have you ever been in a place in your life where you just you didn't lack you didn't doubt the presence of God, but you weren't really sure what he wanted you to do. You weren't really sure what the next step in your life was. And I believe that's where David was. He was really trying to know what God wanted for him. And so in order to learn that, or to get that, he was driven to worship God. He was driven to get in a closer relationship with God, to where he could get out of that spiritual wilderness, or where God would speak to him and put him in the right place. So he talks about he's in a desolate place without water. That imagery, it creates a mental picture of someone who is walking in a desert, but it also shows us someone who can be spiritually dry, doesn't it? He wanted to experience again that strength and that glory of the Lord. He tells us in the next verse. He wants to be in the sanctuary of God, and that word sanctuary simply just talks about the place where God's presence is made known, the place where you can draw closer to God. He longs for that. Now we call the worship center here in our church building the sanctuary. Hopefully, it's a place where people come and in worship they meet God. That to me is always the goal. That is the well, my friend Brad Newbold. I went to a conference on Thursday and I bought his book. He signed it. He said, "I'm not a signer kind of guy, but I'll put my name in it for you." He's become my friend because he's on the Baptist Homes Board with me. We're officers in that group. Anyway, so I bought his book, and the title of the book is "The Worship Target," and I'm intrigued by reading it. I'm not a book reader. I'm a book skimmer. I'll skim through and see, is there anything I can get that might be a good gleaning for me. But I'm probably going to read this one just because my buddy Brad wrote it. But also, I'm intrigued. The worship target, because I believe that's what life really is how can I target in? How can I hone in on worshiping God? And when we understand how satisfying it is, then we long for it. David, as a man after God's own heart, he longed for that. He knew the taste. He yearned for that taste of just touching the presence of God. We rarely really sense the fullness of the presence of God. We've never probably or ever going to be until we get to heaven an Isaiah who gets caught up in the throne room of God. But we can be people who at least taste it. We can be people who at least, when we're thirsting for it and we're faint and we're hungry for it, we can taste it. We can get there. So the implication is that, God's strength could be effective. It would bring about his glory in David's life. He would see the satisfaction that it brings in order to worship God. He says to the Lord, faithful love is better than life. In other words, he's saying, I don't care whether I live or die, as long as you're with me, God. That's where the Apostle Paul got, isn't it? Where he said, to live is Christ and to die is gain. It didn't matter to him, whether you beat him 39 times or, almost killed him or whatever. Because living was Christ and dying would have been gain. And so David then says, so I will bless you as long as I live. At your name, I will lift up my hands. He's just holding up his empty hands in order that God would fill them. That's what we do occasionally in worship, is we just lift up empty hands. We lift up holy hands and we ask God to fill them and to bless them and to make them new for us. We also do like David, and we say, you satisfy me with rich food. I've been walking a faith walk a long time. I guess I could maybe say there's not a lot surprises me about God at this point, but there's sure a lot that satisfies me. And I appreciate that from the Lord. I appreciate the fact that he can fill us. And so what is David saying? He's saying with singing, my mouth will praise you. He's saying that I'm going to lift up my voice to you, God. Okay. So then we move to verses 6-8, which talk about how worship is reassuring. Worship is reassuring. And what does David say? He says, when I think of you as I lie on my bed, I meditate. There again, look at those verbs. I'm thinking. I'm lying on my bed. I'm meditating on you during the night watches because you are my helper. So what will he do? I will rejoice in the shadow of your wings. I follow close to you. Your right hand holds, there's that verb, holds on to me. So it just knows that it's reassuring in order to be able to worship God. When he's parched, when he's hungry, when he feels like he can't go on, he's weak, he's about to stumble or he's about to pass out, he knows that God's sufficient, that God is reassuring, that God will feed him. And so worship is reassuring to him. David was of course, became king. He wasn't, maybe if he was still out here with Saul um, chasing him, but he did become king. Can you imagine? I don't know what would happen in my house if all of a sudden in the middle of the night, God woke me up and I just started singing at the top of my lungs. I might get in trouble, or people might wonder what I was doing. Well, it's just Ellen and I there now, but when the children were little, they probably would have thought I'd lost it. But there have been times in my life when God woke me up, either to teach me something or to remind me of how great He is. And so we do need to, when we are at rest, or when we are at a place where God can really get our attention. David said, I meditate on you during the night watches because you are my helper. I can lay awake at night and think about stressful things in my life that I have to do. But if I start asking God for the strength, for the help to do it, eventually He will give me rest. And sometimes I've been able to go back to sleep thinking, how did I ever get the peace to do that when I've got some hard things I've got to do in my life? Well, it's because of this, because of what David says. You are my helper, and I will rejoice in the shadow of your wings. Just knowing that God's presence is with you, even when you sleep, folks. God's presence is with you. He never leaves. He never forsakes. And then He says, I will follow close to you. The shadow of your wings, like a hen would spread out her wings to protect her chicks, like a bird does to make sure that they are being cared for and taken care of. He said, your right hand holds on to me. And it holds on, meaning that it has a firm grasp, that it has such a grip that it will never let me go. And I know it's never, ever going to let me go. Nothing can give us more security than that, folks. Nothing can. Knowing that the presence of Almighty God, who is the creator of all things, He is greater than all things. He is more than all things, that He's never going to let you go. I hope that you find assurance in that. I hope that you find strength in that. And that's where David is. He is saying that I'm so grateful that God is with me, even in this. Okay? Nothing should make us more peaceful, whether it's night, whether it's daytime, whether it's in the darkest hour of our lives, just knowing that God is with us. And then we go to the last section, verses 9 to 11, where it tells us about how worship instills confidence. So it not only gives us assurance, but it instills confidence. I'm telling you, a lot of times in my life, I've gone to things unsure, not knowing. But there's something about being aware that you're in the presence of God and that you are worshiping Him in the moment. And worship isn't always about singing songs and reading responsive readings and hearing somebody preach. Worship is about surrendering your heart. It's about the motive. It goes back to that, doesn't it? And if my motive is to be humble before the Lord and let Him speak to me, let Him work through me, that's what matters. So this is what the psalmist David said, verse 9. But those who intend to destroy me, get some verbs again here, because these are all going to be negative. Those who intend to destroy my life will go into the depths of the earth. They will be given over to the power of the sword. They will become a meal for jackals. But the king will rejoice in God. All who swear by Him will boast, for the mouths of liars will be shut. There's some negative verbs in there, aren't there? David is saying that there are those who are intending to destroy his life. He has some enemies. He has some people who are out to get him. He has some people that would rather see him dead than alive. I believe David was spiritually inept enough to know that it wasn't just him that they were trying to destroy. It was his God. Because ultimately that's where David's insight, that's where his strength came from, was from God. That was the ultimate thing. If they're out to get him, it's really not him. They're out to get God. And where was his confidence in knowing that they would be defeated? Because God is victorious. Because God is always the winner. You know, I looked in the back of the book and we win kind of thing. Well, that's the way it is. We do when we're on God's side, when we're following him. We will be victorious. So those who were intent upon destroying his life, he said they will be vanquished. And that's a military victory. He's saying that they're not just going to be driven back. They're going to be annihilated. They're going to be wiped out. Um, they're going to be the ones who will be devoured. He says they'll be given over to the power of the sword. In other words, they'll be defeated. Then he says they will become a meal for jackals, scavenger jackals who are like the coyotes who howl at night. They're those critters that are out trying to find whatever they can to eat, and they're looking everywhere to get it. And I kind of miss that about being in the country, hearing the coyotes howl, that kind of thing. Um, Not when they're close, but in the distant. Uh, okay, and so then he says they will go into the depths of the earth. What is he saying there? The depths of the earth concept is that it's a place of no return. We on this side of the cross, deeper in our theological understanding of life after death and what comes next, or at least what we believe Scripture says that God has prepared. We understand that there's lower regions, that there is not everyone's going to excel to the heights that God has prepared for them. Jesus said, I go and prepare a place for you. That is, you who are my disciples, you who are believing in me. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also. But he also talked, twice as much about hell as he did about heaven. And simply because he knew there was a heaven to gain and there was a hell to avoid. And that was his that was his teaching. That's what Jesus taught us. And so we understand that. We know that the depths of the earth, the lower regions, or it's down there somewhere. I don't know what God has intended or what God has planned or where that is in the universe, folks. But I do know that there is a place of eternal separation from God. The Bible is too plain about that. And while some of it may be shadowed in exactly what it is, the fact that it exists is real. And there is a hell to avoid, but there is a heaven to gain. And by putting our faith in Jesus, we gain it. That's where the victory is. So, he is saying the king will rejoice in God, maybe a self-reference to David. We don't know, which would mean, well, maybe he was king at the time, or maybe this is more of a reference to when Absalom was out to take him away from the throne and destroy him. We don't know. We just know that he was confident in God. He knew that God was going to see him through. Hey, we're just cruising right along today. You all have listened so good, so fast. You're fast listeners today. So he says, all who swear by him, that is, whoever takes that oath that God is who God is, then what will happen to them? Well, the liars will have their mouths shut. Isn't it good to know that truth always prevails? That truth is truth no matter how it comes packaged. And it always prevails. Even in a world where people would rather lie to you than tell you the truth. Truth will always be known eventually. So David had no doubt that those who had lied on his behalf, that those who were out to destroy him, that those who were out to get him would one day be judged and silenced forever. What a great passage that is. So when we think about worship and we think about the benefits of worship, you might hear that psalm and say, David's saying, sick 'em, God. Well, I don't know that that's really it. But I do think he is affirming the fact that God does not take lightly those who attack. Uh, he does not take lightly those who are out to get us, because ultimately, if we're living for God, they're out to get him. It's not really us, because they can destroy us, and God is eternal. He goes on. So that's kind of where we are in this. Okay. So the benefits of worship. Well, David said, his motive is just to worship God, and God will take care of the rest. He will. Okay. God bless y'all. Bye-bye.